Good afternoon. Welcome to the Kiwanis Club of Indianapolis, those that are able to attend live and those that are watching the recording. So glad that you guys are all here. If we have any guests or anybody wants to say hello, please drop a quick note in the chat. We always like to connect with one another. We'll start today's meeting with our invocation. May your heart be light and happy. May your smile be big and wide, and may your pockets always carry a coin or two inside. May you find lots of gold at the end of your rainbow this St. Patrick's Day. Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple of quick announcements. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our Kiwanis members who are celebrating anniversaries this week. Doug Du Bois is 11 years, and Gwen Khalil, celebrating second anniversary with us. Mike, do you want to do a couple quick comments on the upcoming basketball program?
Yeah, just want to remind everybody next Friday, the 24th at 11:30 is our 77th annual Boys High School Basketball State Finals luncheon with the Mills family, IHSAA, Pacers Foundation, and so we will not be having a meeting next Thursday. Want to remind you that because we'll be having the boys basketball luncheon on Friday. Bob Lovell has agreed to be there again to interview the final 8 coaches and players. And then our honorary Kiwanian Kyle Nedenrip with Indianapolis Star, who does the high school sports insider, will also be there as our MC, announcing the all-city team and then announcing our scholarship winners. Again, Pacers will have a little time to talk. Quinn Buckner won't be able to make it this year, but Eddie White with the Pacers Foundation will speak. And also our Kiwanian Paul Neidig, who is the IHSAA commissioner. So we expect to get that.
This is about to die. Thank
and
you.
then so make sure if you're going to come to the event, you RSVP to Kelly no later than Monday. Because we have to have our seat count in with Primos. Tickets are $30. And if you are able to help, if we need greeters and table sponsors, if you could be there at 10:30, so we could show you the seating layout and get ready for our guests. So thank you all.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for all of your work on that committee as well, and everyone that has lent a hand on that. Just a quick reminder, if you are not presenting or speaking, if you could please mute yourself, we'll try to keep background noise down. That would be very helpful. Coming up on our program calendar the week after basketball, we'll continue the sports theme and usher in spring with Howard Kellman from the Indy Indians. He'll talk about the upcoming season, current topics that are relevant to the team. In addition to the scholarships that we're awarding at the basketball event next week, we're also selecting the Marion County Female Athlete Award recipient. Those applications have just been completed and the committee is working through those. I'm very excited to see the selection. We have a lot of very talented, caring, compassionate young women that are up for that. That event will be held at Clues on Butler's campus on Wednesday, April 19th. The club does have a block of tickets. If anyone's interested in attending, please let me know. We'll get those your way. And we'll be joining the Colts, Pacers, and Speedway as sponsors of that event. So big marquee event for us. We will not have a meeting on Thursday, the 20th, as we'll be coming out of that. On Thursday, April 27th, Graham has lined up another fantastic author. We are so fortunate to have this run of really incredible authors with us. Diana Enriquez was the first reporter to interview Bernie Madoff after he was sent to prison. And her story is featured in the Netflix docu-series that's currently running. So you get to watch TV, you can read a book, and you can come hear her speak. Thanks to all of our Salvation Army bell ringers that took part in the Golden Kettle campaign at the close of the year. We raised over $3,300 for the Salvation Army and their Christmas campaign. The Salvation Army joined us last week during our meeting to share the great news in front of our speaker, Don Steffi, who is the Rotary president, and thanked both clubs for their involvement in that competition and the impact that we've been able to make on our community. Thank you to bell ringers, Nancy, Jay, Jackie, Trent, Roger, Bill, Mike, Katie, Laura, Steve, Janan, Art, Chuck, Bob, Jeff, Kelly, Carol, Greg, Don, Eric, Lunita, and David. I'm glad I didn't try that in one breath. Thank you, everybody. If you are interested in chairing bell ringing for next year, we are looking for a captain for that. Please let me know or let Nancy know as well. Finally, we awarded just over $27,000 in community grants to 11 organizations this year. Thank you to Laura Berry, Nathan Ashworth, and Mike Halstead, who have been out delivering checks recently as part of our foundation's prize patrol. Later this year, each of our grant recipients will visit the club and share how our resources have helped them achieve some of their goals. Let's see. Roger, I'm going to turn things over to you to give a quick update on anything treasure related, district leadership related. You are allowed to unmute.
Okay. Couldn't find my on-off switch. All right, as the club treasurer, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to get your spring dues submitted. I think the invoices are out or coming out. Our next monthly meetup at Iozzo's Garden of Italy is Monday, April 17th. We had a real nice meeting last week. Saw Ed Doyle, who we haven't seen for a while. This is a great way to visit with Kiwanians if you're not able to make it to Thursday lunch meetings. I also serve as Lieutenant Governor for the Capital Division of the Indiana District Kiwanis and help out with the Riley Kids efforts. That's Kiwanis in direct support for Riley. We'll be inviting Riley Foundation to our first meeting of the new Kiwanis year on Thursday, October the 5th, to talk about the new mental health initiative. In the meantime, please consider donating items from deodorant to candy bars. You'll see a list available that she's got on the screen right now. And it's always available. But this is a very worthwhile effort. I'm going to try to wrangle some people. You know, Carol has done it, gone over and pushed the cart. I want to try to do that and get some people involved doing that. We also don't forget to collect pop tabs every meeting. Please save these and bring them there for the Ronald McDonald House. And if I could, a couple quick ones. Just a reminder, international conference is coming up for Kiwanis. That'll be in Minneapolis in June. I think it's 21st to the 24th. Nancy may know. I think Nancy's planning on going. I'm going. So it's always a big event and neat to see. Next week, and I think maybe for both of these, Builders Club Week, and I'm not sure about Key Club Week. Lou, is that next week? You're muted.
We're getting a nod.
Nod, yes. Okay, so those are two of our major SLP groups, the senior leadership programs. So that's what I got.
Perfect. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
If you are interested in going to international convention, the club does have a couple of stipends for that. So reach out to Kelly. She can get you details on that if that would be helpful and get you there. Without further ado, I would like to turn things over to Graham to introduce our speaker today. Thank you again for making this happen.
Thank you, Trina, and thanks for those of you who are joining us. And again, we'll be sending this recording out to a large population of our club, and also I had a number of others interested in seeing this. So thank you for being here. And as I tee this up, I'm going to ask Kelly to go ahead and put the book link in the chat. And I'm going to highly encourage all of you to buy this book. Last summer, I was out in San Diego visiting my brother, and I sure wish I was there today with the lousy weather we continue to have here. And I stopped in a little bookstore in La Jolla, California, beautiful, right next to the ocean. And I saw this book, The Founders. I'm a avid reader in the business tech sector books, and I picked it up, and 5 days later I had finished it. It's a really fascinating story. Probably all of us know PayPal, use PayPal, and I'll let Jimmy talk more, but chronicles the really fascinating rise of the company, which spawns some very interesting characters, well-known characters that Jimmy will talk about. But before I let him speak, I want to give his background. So Jimmy Soni, he's joining us from New York, writes about people who create and build interesting things, whether theories, carousels, or companies. His work explores everything from ancient history to modern companies, and he's drawn to stories of innovation, endurance, curiosity, and creativity, which sums this book up really well. He spent more than 6 years documenting the origin of PayPal and the rise to power of its founders, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Max Levchin, and Reid Hoffman. In the book, again, The Founders, the story of PayPal and the entrepreneurs who shaped Silicon Valley, national bestseller, and received critical acclaim from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, New Yorker, The Economist, Financial Times, and more. Makes me sad. The only praise I got from my books was from my mom. So he's got quite a few more accolades. He previously wrote A Mind at Play, How Claude Shannon Invented the Information Age, explored the life and times of Dr. Claude Shannon, founder of the field of information theory and one of the 20th century's forgotten geniuses. Prior work was Rome's Last Citizen, the life and legacy of Cato. Shared the story of the ancient Roman senator Cato the Younger, archrival of Julius Caesar. He started his career at McKinsey Company. I want to ask him about this transition from McKinsey, very famous consulting company, to being an author. Lives in Brooklyn, New York with his daughter, Venice. As a Wake Forest grad, I'm not supposed to say this, but he's a Duke graduate. Great school, love Duke. I'm just glad that Duke does not play during this time, or you'd have to reschedule. We're really honored to have you today. One of the things we've tried to do, started in the pandemic, is bring in some nationally recognized authors. And again, this is one of the best books I've read in recent years. So Jimmy, welcome. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me. I tried to move to a location where there's less noise, so I hope we won't be affected by it.
No, that sounds great. And if it's okay with you, we're going to just do a little Q&A, and feel free to add any color commentary, and then we're going to open it up for questions from.
My only two amendments to your intro. One is, the praise for your book might be coming from NPR in the next 48 hours, so it won't just be your mom.
Oh yeah,
and National Public Radio, which would be very cool. It's nice.
We will see, hopefully.
And the other thing I was going to say is, the one word that I realized, like on my bio on my website, I didn't particularly explain well. Carousel sort of like is not, usually used in the same sentence as Peter Thiel or Elon Musk. So that probably bears like 1 minute of explanation, which is, for those who have visited New York, in Brooklyn, there's a really lovely carousel along the waterfront in Brooklyn, in Dumbo. It's called Jane's Carousel. And I took my daughter there just like an ungodly number of times because, 3 and 4 year olds don't tire of doing the same thing over and over again. And in the process, I found out more about it. It has an interesting history. So I wrote to the person who renovated it and like kind of restored it to its original glory, discovered it was like a century-old carousel. And this woman is Jane Walentas, the late Jane Walentas. She passed away actually just before this book came out. But we did a coffee table book about Jane's Carousel. And it has an extraordinary story. It was from Ohio. It survived, it survived basically like 2 world wars, the Great Depression, a fire, and everything else. And she restored it to its sort of original grandeur. But the amazing thing is she hand restored it over a period of almost 2 decades, scraping away at these carousel horses, rediscovering the original paint. And I just thought the story was amazing. And I kind of just told Jane, I said, you should really write a book about this. And she said, well, why don't we work on it together? And I'll actually get it done.
That's awesome. Okay, so the first question, I alluded to it. I'm fascinated by the move from McKinsey to really being an author. For those of you who don't know, McKinsey is one of the world's top consulting firms. They recruit heavily from the Ivy Leagues. It's a very prestigious place. So can you talk about that transition and what inspired you to make that jump?
Oh, that's funny. I never actually like talk about my time there. And again, apologies for some of the background noise. Hopefully it abates in a second. I don't know if anybody's been in consulting. I found that I loved my colleagues, but the work was a little dry for my taste, just the things that I enjoyed. And as a way of basically like, it's either sort of like you find a good hobby or you get into therapy. And my hobby was, while I was at McKinsey, I was kind of moonlighting on book proposals, and that's what led to my first book. It was, it's great. You work with really, really smart people, but just the work wasn't to I wanted more control over what I was doing. I really liked creative work. I've loved books ever since I was a little kid. And all of my books I've written while working full time. And so the first place I did that was McKinsey, and I would just sort of do nights and weekends on books. And then it just, that habit stuck, and I did that a few times. So there's no sort of grand story. It was more that, I just had this as a side hustle, right? Ryan Reynolds makes wireless companies. I write books. One is more lucrative than the other.
Yeah, I saw the
sent an
price of
email
what
to
his
Kelly,
companies.
and she sent me a different link.
I saw the price of what his company sold for. I think it was in the billions. We probably should get out of writing and into the tech world. Talk before we dive into the book. Talk this specific book again on PayPal. What was the motivation here? You in the bio we talk about your interest and curiosities. What was the specific interest in diving into this one?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of those that a lot of my projects, they're sort of not they kind of follow one from the other, but there's not a kind of like grand theme. I'm not like somebody that's going to do the same book over and over and over again. And so with this one, I had spent a lot of time looking at the life of Dr. Claude Shannon. And we don't have to go into him, but he worked at a place called Bell Laboratories. And Bell Labs, many people on the call may know the name Bell Labs. There's a really wonderful book called The Idea Factory that goes into basically Bell Labs is like, the 90s era Chicago Bulls of innovation, right? They invent the transistor. If you've ever dialed a touch-tone phone or used a touch-tone keypad, you can say thank you to Bell Labs. They invent the laser. They invent, they improve on the bazooka. They win 7 Nobel Prizes. So there's this just like incredible constant to make that happen. I started thinking, what are other clusters of talent like that? And within American technological history, there are a few. Xerox PARC is one. Fairchild Semiconductor is another. And there are a few others as well. One of those clusters was PayPal. People had already written books about Bell Labs, Xerox PARC, and Fairchild Semiconductor, but PayPal was ground that was not picked over. And one of the funny things is I was like convinced that I would go on Amazon and find a book because, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, some of these like titans of our time worked there. And so I just went on Amazon and I only found one book, and it was actually a memoir from someone who worked there. And, individual memoir of your time at a company is one perspective, but it's by definition your perspective on the company. No one had done the kind of like end-to-end interview hundreds of people, talk to Elon, that sort of thing for PayPal. And I said, somebody should really do this. Like, this is just like an empty space on a bookshelf. Somebody should really go out. And I just kept like talking to one of my friends about it. I said, this really needs to be done. And finally, I'm just going to see how far I can go with this. And we're in a small group, and we come trust through sort of a trusted person, Graham, and I can share that like, that was about the extent of it. I'm not Kara Swisher. I don't write about technology every day. There was a bit of this that I just said, I'm just going to keep knocking on doors. And if someone says no, like if Elon Musk says, I'm not going to sit down with you, and if you do this book, I'll sue you, I obviously have like a reason to stop. But I just kept asking people to talk to me about their PayPal tenure, and I kind of strung together one introduction to the next. And what happened is that the truth of it, like no one said, hey, actually, I don't want you writing this book. In fact, Peter, if anything, they were unusually
You're freezing on, I
talking
think
about it
you're
in the research.
freezing a little bit.
Oh,
on us.
I'm sorry. I'm doing
No,
it
you're okay. You're okay.
the best I can with it. But they basically, no one said no. And 20 years had passed since PayPal was created. And these incredibly powerful people look upon this period nostalgically. And I found that that like led to a great series of stories, and they were able to actually be honest with me about successes and failures. And that's what led to the book. But it was the original idea came from a search for clusters of talent, as opposed to like the single person, you know, like a Steve Jobs or a Mark Zuckerberg, where it's one story.
That's great. My immediate reaction, though, is Elon Musk has enough lawsuits on his hands that you were probably safe. By the way, do you find it? I find this the case. Like everybody knows Elon Musk now is like the world's wealthiest guy, Tesla, Twitter, political opinions, that people have forgotten that that's where he started, basically. Have you sort of found that in your, oh, wait, yeah, that's right. He was part of that.
100%. To be honest, it's actually like, I think like the great challenge, this is like one of my emerging theories about being a billionaire, right? It's like, no, you know, world's smallest violin, let's be clear. But one of the things if I think about being a billionaire is like, let's say you achieve it, you know, as he did, I mean, in his 40s or 50s, people basically pretend like you were born that way. Like you were born at age 45 with billions of dollars. Like they forget your childhood. Yeah. They forget everything that happened to you until the point you became a billionaire. And it's funny because I will, you know, people will say, oh, I didn't know Elon was a part of PayPal. He's actually a huge part of PayPal. And he left the company on not the best terms, but he is still very good friends with all of the founders. They've all invested with each other. It is kind of funny. I think there is basically like what I'm calling like billionaire amnesia. Like if you become a billionaire, your life before that day is completely forgotten to everybody but the people you're closest to.
Yeah, absolutely. Access. I read that you looked through 150,000 pages of emails, which I can't even fathom. How did you talked about some of it is just asking, right? Like I always, when I talk to Butler students here, I'm like, you'd be surprised if you actually ask people what you want out of them, how many people say yes. How did you go about the access in terms of getting like Elon Musk's phone number? Probably isn't the easiest thing to get to. And did you get any pushback?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And there's a two-part answer. The first part is the people. The second part is the kind of documents and records. The people, you know, I started with Peter Thiel. He is the person who's kind of one of the nodes of the network. He's still in touch with just about everybody. And he's invested in a lot of the companies that came out of PayPal. So for people listening, just as way of background, the founders of YouTube came out of this alumni group. The founders of Yelp came out of this alumni group. SpaceX, Tesla, Palantir, the first money into Twitter, Facebook, Uber, Dropbox, almost anything technical, like it's likely that some road traces back to PayPal. So it is far more interesting than just the sort of creation of like this payments company that many of us use. I went to Peter and I sort of said, look, I want to do this, but only if you want to sit down and be interviewed. And I need you to open a couple of doors, right? So he made the first couple introductions. And then I went from there and just kind of like would daisy chain introductions. Like I would make sure that, you know, people were okay with me talking to people. After that, it was hundreds of cold emails. And just to put I think somebody's not on mute, but there's a phone ringing or something's happening.
Yeah, please put yourself on mute if you're not.
But I'll put the sort of to put the button on so I can we can move on because I know we have limited time. I found interestingly, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people, you know, if you're being listened to is actually something that like doesn't exist in your life sometimes. You know, everybody who comes at you in a given day wants something, you know, whether it's money or whether it's support for a project that is like operational, whatever it is. And in my case, I had this interesting experience. It was like, I could care less what they were doing today. I never really asked Elon about Tesla or SpaceX, except in as much as they were related to PayPal. And he just got to tell stories from his time in college and from what that experience was like. And he was also able to be honest about it because he's not a shareholder in PayPal. And so there was no skin in the game, right? Meaning that like, he wasn't just telling me the stuff that went well, he could tell me the stuff that went badly because it didn't affect his life today, right? But I found that like there were some obvious credibility I had coming from the Claude Shannon book. When you walk in with a book about a scientist that many of these people whose name they know, that obviously sends a different kind of signal. I wasn't just some Yahoo showing up, with a bunch of questions, but I found that one of the biggest things was just, I was willing to listen to them tell stories about a period in their life when they became who they became, the kind of maturation period, the period when they didn't, have money or access or power. And the stories were episode was a lot less certain. In the course of that, to get to your specific question, I don't know how this happened, but this person saved 5 gigabytes of their corporate email from that period in some like ancient Outlook format that I had to like get a decoder ring to figure out. But this person saved it and put it in a Dropbox folder. I downloaded it, made 3 copies, told my best friend that if I got hit by a bus, that where the copies were in my bedroom, and that was what formed a lot of what's in the book. Now, the virtue of that, for those who might read the book, in the book, you will see Peter's note to the company after 9/11. You will see Elon's resignation note. You will see emails that testify that what you're reading in the book is not just like my supposition, but it is literally just like straight from the inbox. And it was a heck of a find. And I, sort of am grateful to this person for being a pack rat and keeping those emails.
You make a really good point, not to allude back to my books. The second book I wrote would have never happened without the first. It gave me some credibility to do that. Okay, just in a 1.5, 2-minute synopsis. Again, we know we're talking about PayPal, one of the great success stories of the dot-com era. Give us just a synopsis of the book and a couple of the characters and the incredible story where it almost folded a couple times. Just give us a little bit of synopsis before we go into a deeper dive.
Yeah, I think let me do it this way. People who are dialed in or listening have probably used PayPal, received money from PayPal, or if not PayPal, you use Venmo, which is owned by PayPal. Back in the dial-up internet days, the idea of being able to send money over email that quickly, that securely was somewhat of a fantasy. This had never been done before. By the way, we take all of this very much for granted. Like even this Zoom call, I mean, this is like a technological miracle, right? Like this is like impossible 10, 20 years ago. In the same way, secure money transfer was not possible. But that's part one of the story. Part two of the story is that this incredibly bright group of people, 200 plus people in Palo Alto, around 600 people in Omaha, Nebraska, came together and started to build this company right as the dot-com bubble burst. And so many people on the call probably remember when the dot-com bubble burst, there were people writing articles about how the internet might be a fad, right? That the internet might be this thing that, like disappears. And so from 1999 to 2002, this particular group of people had the experience of building a company under duress. My book is the story of that period and the ups, the downs, the highs, the lows. This group lived through 9/11 together. They lived through an IPO together. They lived through a sale of a company together. And that particular experience shaped YouTube. It shaped Tesla. It shaped everything that came after. That's the kind of 2-minute synopsis.
That's awesome. When we look back, even if you weren't, a tech guru, we know how many dot-coms failed. We know how much money was lost back in that time. Can you talk through what made PayPal successful? Because what I found interesting is you have these characters just with these diverse personalities, hard charging, egos, really young people. Like I could barely get out of bed in the morning and make my bed, and they're inventing one of the greatest inventions of our time. Talk about why they succeeded when others didn't.
Yeah, it's like anything. There's no silver bullet answer, but I'll highlight a few of the kind of constituent ingredients. One is that PayPal took off on a platform called eBay. And eBay in its early days, some may remember, it was like sort of the internet's flea market, a place for trading Beanie Babies, right? When those were all the rage. But eBay had figured out the auction side of its business. They had not quite gotten a handle on the payment side of their business. Into that void steps PayPal. PayPal takes off in a big way because it's handing $10 and $20 bonuses out left and right. And so they managed to get users. That's kind of step one. Step two is to turn users into a business. And that's really hard with financial platforms. But the thing that, to your question, what made the company, is they solve what is a devilishly hard problem to solve on the internet, which is financial fraud. So how do you make sure that Graham, if he sends money to Jimmy, is actually Graham, right? How do you verify that? PayPal did a number of brilliant things, very hard things to do to make that happen. The third thing I would say, and this is a little counterintuitive, you alluded to the dot-com bubble bursting. In the year 2000, the NASDAQ loses almost 90% of its value. Whole portfolios are wiped out. Companies go under. The most famous example is, pets.com bought a Super Bowl ad in January of 2000. And by October of 2000, they were bankrupt, right? The pressure of that forced this team to move very, very, very quickly to make the company work. And it basically kind of was this, like, it was like a long, very boring Rocky montage, like where they're having to fix the company, and they did it. They did it by the skin of their teeth. Company almost went under a bunch, did it, and it was successful. There are a whole host of other things that went into it, but those are kind of three big things. The success of being on eBay, the ability to defeat financial fraud, and the pressure of knowing that there was no new round of venture capital funding that was going to bail them out, that they had to figure out how to make it work.
So a lot of fascinating characters in this book and how they were recruited. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. I was thinking about it. Kind of reminds me of like Ocean 11, when like all these people are just, they're picked out because their expertise and they come together. I don't know if that's an apt analogy or not.
I've heard Ocean's 11, and someone said Avengers is the other one.
Okay. Yeah. Elon Musk, I mean, we could talk a lot about the characters, but Elon Musk, one of the most famous people in the world for a lot of reasons right now. Can you just give us a little bit of a character sketch in terms of what he was like then, his evolution as a leader, and then the time you got with him, your impressions?
Yeah, it was one of these, it's a very curious thing that, like, I spent time with him before the Twitter acquisition. I spent time with him right when SpaceX and Tesla were still in very, very uncertain periods. And what I would say is, like, I had the fortune of exploring with him, interviewing him about years, like, let's say 18 to, 35-ish, around there. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'll sort of share kind of like what I walk away with from that experience or from those years of his life. Because today, he's, as I said, he's sort of a caricature. He's like a Rorschach test for people. Like, you say Elon Musk and you can learn more about the person you said that to than you can about Elon, right? During the 4 years in which my book takes place, Elon loses a child to SIDS. He is thrown out of a company that he creates, PayPal. He almost dies in a car accident with Peter Thiel in this sort of sports car they were driving in. And
he was driving way too fast, just
yes,
for the record, right?
And
like
driving the McLaren.
It wasn't like somebody T-boned him.
The McLaren F1 is also a car that really, like, you need to be an expert driver to drive. You need to, like, learn how to drive a car, right? Or how to drive a car differently, because the McLaren is a different kind of beast. The final thing is he contracts malaria and meningitis while abroad with his then wife, and is basically kind of hours from death. He gets, as I came to learn, the truly terrible kind of malaria. And it was sort of happened at the same time that he had contracted meningitis as well. So the 4 years I'm writing about him are really like the low point in his career. And it's in the aftermath of the period that I write about him that he buys this URL for www.spacex.com and starts all over again. And I know there are strong opinions about him one way or the other, but I come out of this project really admiring his endurance, because I don't think I could face one of those things and get up and do it all over again. I would say, particularly as a father, the loss of a child, I just like don't even like to think about that possibility because it's too terrifying for me, right? But to go through all four of those things in a space of a very short period of time, and then to get up and continue to be an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur that many American entrepreneurs look up to, I think is something that is worth praising. PayPal was interesting because it was, you know, he still is trying to make this vision happen. His version of the company PayPal, the URL he bought was x.com. He purchased this URL again later in life, and he still believes in the X mission. And the X mission, just in brief, is that your entire financial life should live in one place: mortgages, loans, insurance, checking, banking, savings, brokerage, all of it in one place. And his view was there were just too many middlemen in finance, and in a digital world, why couldn't we just have everything live on x.com, and you could have your entire, he goes, I just wanted X to be the global financial system. And, you know, so no shortage of audacious ambition. But that's what I walk away with, is a sort of respect for the endurance, and then an appreciation for his version of PayPal was not what PayPal became. His version of PayPal was far more all-encompassing.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Did you get in person with him? Were you okay in California, I'm assuming?
Pre-pandemic, so we were able to do in person in California. And you know, it's a phenomenal experience. We intended to talk for an hour. We talked for 4.5. You know, he's a great storyteller. And if you, again, like, you know, this is not the easiest time in his life, but if someone actually cares to listen, you know, he has great insights to share. And I found that the other thing is he was really reflective on some of the layers that he had. You know, he was willing at this point in his life to admit some of the things that did not go well, learn from them. But it was before, you know, I would say it's sort of before his life got even crazier in some ways, like if that were possible. And so
It gets crazier by the day.
Yeah, I would say he was very gracious with his time, and he was very honest with his answers. And that is, you know, you just never know. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. You use the word endurance. That for me, I thought about resilience with his life. Again, no matter what you think of him, but also the company in general, the resilience would have been so easy to give up, and so many hurdles that they hit. Fraud, like the Russian groups that kept hacking them. I mean, just everything. You know, they were like hours from, you know, going under. I mean, the resilience is really fascinating. Do you think if PayPal fails, what happens to Elon Musk? That to me was also an interesting question.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's funny. I haven't actually been asked that before. I would, if I had to venture a guess, and this is totally a guess, knowing what I know about him, the outcome might have been the same, because he just simply does not stop. And the mission, it was electric cars and getting to Mars, right? Cars and Mars. And he is going to do that, whatever may have come. PayPal could have gone under. It would have set him back a few years, because it would have financially probably been a little bit more difficult, particularly for SpaceX. But I don't think you would have seen anything all that different. I will say that the interesting thing, just again, to be brief about it, but it's no wonder that so many of these people went on to later successes, because this first big success was really hard. And it kind of taught the skill of resilience. Is a skill, right? It can be trained. And this group of startup entrepreneurs knew what it meant to have to be resilient. They often, by the way, will contrast themselves with the people who were early employees at Google, because there's kind of this group is often referred to as the PayPal mafia. And the kind of line is like, well, there's no Google mafia. And the joke is, because at Google, you know, if you just point the fire hose of traffic somewhere, you would just have success.
Yeah.
Like, you build something and you could then had to really fight for its foothold and for its keep. And so I think that there's a direct connection between, let's say, that and the success of YouTube later, because YouTube, it had to fight for its achievements as well. But I think that resilience was vitally important for all of these people. And to your earlier, his will is strong enough. I think he would have pursued SpaceX and Tesla, whether PayPal had succeeded or not.
Thoroughly concur. He's just one of those people that's so driven. Two last questions about Musk. You actually cut out a lot of stuff from the book. I mean, I think you originally had 450,000 words, which is a lot. You cut it down to 160,000-ish. How come you chose to keep out the malaria story? Because I didn't realize that at all.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you noticed. I mean, that's like a very specific thing to notice. Chronologically, the malaria and meningitis, it's at the end of chapter 14 for me. I mentioned one little note about it, but it actually like is not, it's kind of, it happens as the company is doing other things. And ultimately, the book is not a story about Musk. I wasn't writing Elon Musk's biography. I was writing kind of the biography of PayPal. And when he leaves PayPal, I, kept my focus, or kept the kind of like lens of the camera on the people who are building the company, not on Elon. And that was an editorial choice. And I stand by it just because Elon's stories are always interesting, but this company is much bigger than one person. It was kind of like, I needed to, I gave him a nice exit at the end of chapter 14, and I needed to go to the rest of the company and, have basically the back third of the book, bubble bursting, all the fraud stuff. How do they go public? What happens at 9/11? All of that.
Yeah. Last Musk question. I saw this in an interview you did. There's a rumor that he lives in a $50,000 house. Is that, I can't imagine that's true, but I wanted to ask you that.
One of the nice things about writing about like the early years is I have the luxury of paying zero attention to anything that goes on in his life right now, which is really nice. I don't know, so I don't know the accuracy of that story. What I can say that may shed some light on this, when I interviewed him, we were in the middle of this just like massive Bel Air estate that he owned at the time. And I had this really specific feeling when I was interviewing him. And the specific feeling I had was we could be in the middle of a trailer and we would have the same conversation and he would have the same. He showed so little interest in any of the kind of the things that were in the, I mean, it was almost like it was like an Airbnb. like it was almost like we were in someone else's house, right? Yeah. Because he was so laser focused on like the concepts we were talking about, the ideas, the company, the technology, like everything else was just kind of, the cathedral ceilings were just kind of background noise. Like it didn't matter. And so I actually think that's a great quality. He is who he is, regardless of circumstance. And the truth is, people often say, well, he's a multi-billionaire. And it's like, you really wouldn't know. Like the mission and the companies are the wealth is a side effect, and a nice side effect. But I never got the sense in talking to him that mattered all that much. I mean, it matters in as much as it allows him to do some of the things he wants to do. But it would not surprise me if he lived in a 50,000 square foot home at all, or a $50,000 home at all. Just because I had that specific reaction. I was like, we could be anywhere right now and we would have had the same conversation. It did not matter. He didn't get up to like, show me around the house. Like, I got the sense we're almost like in an Airbnb.
Yeah, he struck me as somebody who's not driven by money at all, ironically. But he, to me, you probably read the Walter Isaacson books on the great innovators, which are awesome books, by the way. To me, he wants to sort of eclipse those people, to be better known than certainly a Steve Jobs, but a Newton, all these people in achieving his ambitions. I think by the way, the
other thing is because you made that point, he and several of the other people who are at the heart of this story could have retired very easily much earlier in their lives. It's rarely about the money, because he had with the sale of his first company before PayPal, he got a check for $28 million. I mean, it was one of the first, it was Zip2, sort of an internet yellow pages. That was, that was plenty to retire. The same is true for Peter Thiel after PayPal. The same is true for Max Levchin. Money is obviously a part of what they do. And Silicon Valley builds these enormous fortunes. The fortune is just about the least interesting thing to most of these people. It is a very curious relationship with money, right? So actually, Michael Lewis was one of my favorite authors. When he wrote this book called The New Thing, and when he gave some talk about it, and he said, being nouveau riche in Silicon Valley is actually the exact kind of thing you want to be. No one actually cares if you made your money 10 years ago.
Yeah. We're going to open it up to questions. Please put your questions in the chat. And the last question I have is, what's been the feedback from the founders?
It's actually interesting. They've been really nice. Elon tweeted really favorably about me, which was a super nice thing. He didn't have to do it. I didn't ask him to say anything. And you never know which way the Twitter account's going to go. So it was like a coin flip. But he said some really nice things about me on Twitter. Peter has said great things about the book. And the other people who have read it, the thing they said that I actually appreciate the most, they said two things. One is it was accurate. So that was good. They said it's an actually accurate account of how this company came to be. That was important to me. The second thing they said that was important to me is one of them said, I lived this story and I learned new things about my colleagues while reading it. And I said, that's exactly what I was going for. Like, I was trying to go for a level of depth, 300 interviews, thousands of documents, talking to all the board where to the point that like you would learn new things despite having lived the story. And that was probably the highest praise that any of them could have said, but they've all been very nice. I'm in the position of I'm a professional. I'm not going to ask them to do anything or to help in any way. They've been very kind in helping, with little things here and there and telling people to read the book.
Awesome. We've got a couple questions. We've talked a little bit about Musk, but what have some of the other founders have done since the sale of PayPal?
Sure. I mean, it's quite the range. One of them is, and again, it's hundreds of people. So I'll sort of try to give some of the highlights and just to give some of the variety. One of the people who I write about who didn't have a long tenure at the company became a magician. He's Silicon Valley's like most famous professional magician. Ken Howry became an ambassador. He just finished up his ambassadorship. Max Levchin is the founder of a company called Affirm. David Sachs is now, he's very famous doing tech things, but now he's a famous podcaster with the All In podcast. There are people who are involved in politics. There are people, one person built a charter school network. I interviewed this woman, Amy Rowe Clement. Her company, Imaginable Ventures, her kind of stated personal mission in life is scaling love. So she is trying to scale love. And she has, I don't know, some crazy amount of money under management that's just doing.
Do you have her website?
I can send it to you after. It's Imaginable or Imagining Ventures. There are people who report to, Sundar at Google. There are people who are senior people at Facebook. It's sort of all over the map, right? But I would say like a good example is like, the head of Airbnb.org, which is Airbnb's like philanthropy, is a PayPal alum. Ancestry.com, the CEO is a PayPal alum. I mean, on and on. It's just endless, right? It's an endless series of people who went on to new things and interesting things.
I was fascinated with Levchin's story. He grew up in like communist Russia, right? And then like moved here when he was young. I mean, just, Musk. I mean, I don't think a lot of people realize his background coming from South Africa and the hoops. I was amused by his time, and I think he started at Wharton and maybe, but like the professors, like basically this guy, he's like too smart for us to handle, basically stuff like that.
It's the point you make is an interesting one around one specific dimension that I think is also sometimes easily overlooked, particularly in an era when like big tech isn't on anybody's Christmas card list. There were a lot of immigrants in this story. Max Levchin came here with, I think it was like when I ran the numbers when the conversion and stuff, it was like $600 his family had when he moved here. He was in high school. Elon, same sort of story, moved from Canada to the United States because he moved from Queen's University in Ontario to the University of Pennsylvania. Peter Thiel was born abroad, then moved to the United States, on and on. I mean, down the line, many, many, many people. And it's one of the things that Silicon Valley does best is it kind of skims the cream of the world's top technical talent. And, we have many of the technologies we do because of it. And it's a part of this story that's really, honestly, easily overlooked.
Yeah. Let's do a kind of a lightning round because I want to get into all the questions we can in 4 minutes here. Is Elon, I think you alluded to this, is he still invested in companies that followed PayPal, such as YouTube, others. I think you did say he's still an investor in quite a few of these.
I'm not, I don't think so, because investing is actually, he doesn't do it. He's not the kind of investor extraordinaire. Peter Thiel is invested in many of the post PayPal or kind of PayPal follow-on companies. Elon's game is building companies, not really investing in them.
Yeah. Let's see. Your next book could be The Value of Immigrants to This Country. Absolutely. Any other questions from the audience? I've got one in terms of, it's awesome what these people do in creating transformative products and innovations, but the lifestyle, very unhealthy. And you talk about that in this of like not sleeping for weeks, the diet, like not eating pizza like 24/7. Can you just talk about like that balance of like, yes, they achieved great success, but some of it came at a cost, right?
Yeah, it came at an enormous cost. And what I would say about this is true for many startups. To create a startup is basically to decide to be under siege, because there are incumbents who want you to fail, right? There are, in the case of PayPal, all the big banks wanted PayPal to fail. eBay wanted PayPal to fail. PayPal made eBay better, and eBay wanted PayPal to fail because if somebody owned the cash registers in your store, you'd want them to fail too, right? And so if you're in a situation where you're a startup, you're underfunded relative to your competitors, really you only have a few advantages. One is that you can question the way things have been done before. Two is that you can move things out.
We've got you frozen again.
To market more quickly, right? Oh, I'm sorry. There's really only three advantages. Is hustle, speed, and the ability. It's one of the only advantages.
Gotcha. Yeah, one quick side note again, for all of Musk's successes, I think there's definitely been some personal sacrifices. I think he's on maybe his fourth or fifth marriage, but that could also be another book, probably. You could team up with the founder of the Scaling Up Love and combine that with a Musk.
Right.
Last question, are there any comparisons in the startup of Square and PayPal?
Because a lot of the people who started Square came out of this group. I think the COO, Keith Raboy, the COO of Square, Keith Raboy, he cut his technological teeth at PayPal. And so there are a lot of very similar lessons. There's also lessons on the operational, do a whole separate session just on.
Gotcha. Well, we can't thank you enough for your time. Again, I'm going to recommend every one of you go out and buy the book. Let's put it in the chat one more time. If it's okay with you, we're gonna put this on YouTube and share it with our members. We've got quite a big membership base. So Kelly, let's make sure that goes into the weekly newsletter. And then this will be out on YouTube as well, that obviously you can use if you'd like. But just again, one of the great books that I've read last couple of years, very fascinating. Even if you're not into the tech world, the lessons from this, the characters are fascinating. So Jimmy, thank you again. I'm going to turn it back over to our president for a special presentation here.
Thank you
Perfect.
for having me.
Yes, I will echo everything Graham said. Very much appreciate the time that you shared with us today, but more so the work that you put into, that 500,000 words and then cutting it back down. That had to have been incredibly difficult, but fantastic work. And in honor of your visit with us today, we're making a donation in your name to the Center for Leadership Development here in Indianapolis. They foster they foster the advancement of minority youth as future professionals, business and community leaders by providing experiences that encourage personal development and educational attainment. So thank you for making a difference in our local community and more broadly.
Well, thank you all very much. And I hope to do this again sometime. either with a new book or we could dive into some of the other characters and
I
personalities.
was gonna
Yes, please.
ask you, I know we're over time. Do you have an idea for your next book?
Yeah, I actually am sort of in the middle of it now. I'll just do this. The 30-second version is there are a couple of stories. One story, there was a woman who was wrongfully imprisoned for 36 years. I connected with her. She fought for her freedom every year for 36 years. And this will be her book, but I'll be the writer on it. And it's an amazing story. I mean, like, we think Elon's resilient. He's got nothing on Judy Henderson. And if you sort of Google CNN and Judy Henderson, you'll learn about how she spent 3.5 decades of her life in prison. She was only recently released. We are telling a story of what it takes to survive that.
Awesome. Okay, Trina, you want to?
How does somebody get?
Sorry about that. Technology is beautiful. Anybody that wants to stick around and chat, you are more than welcome to. But with this, meeting is adjourned. We will see you at the basketball scholarship lunch next Friday. If you haven't RSVP'd, do it today. You have a couple of days, but do it today. Help Kelly out. See you guys next week.